Earth orbit. Danger, danger, space, debris. Collision, imminent. Radiation, detected, radiation, detected. Magnetic, pole, reversal. Solar, electromagnetic, pulse approaching. My name is Helen, the HEL 9000 computer. You are listening to Small World Radio.
It's a small world. It's a small world. It's all one. It's a small world. We're living in one small world. It's a small world. It's all one. It's a small world. We're living in one small world. It's a small world.
Just want to bring you some breaking news coming into us from Russia. The Agence Press news agency is reporting that the 6-member crew of the International Space Station have been forced to evacuate to their Soyuz rescue vehicles. This was after spotting fast approaching debris. They're quoting a source within the Russian space industry saying the space junk was detected too late for a ducking maneuver. We'll bring you more on that as we get it.
Whether traveling in a circle or an elliptical path, there are many things in Earth orbit that are dangerous. In October 2007, the U.S. Navy shot down an out-of-service satellite with a cruise missile before it re-entered the atmosphere. The reason? The satellite carried hazardous material on board, and had it crashed to the ground, could have poisoned thousands.
That hazardous material was 1,000 pounds of hydrazine, which is a standard propellant.
The operation was called Burnt Frost, and it was the most elaborate effort thus far to protect the world from a serious yet growing problem called space debris, or space junk.
Space junk is anything that's man-made that was put into space and is no longer functioning. Oh, we've got junk that's been up there for as long as we've been in space.
Like a junkyard slowly becoming cluttered with debris, from the first launch of Sputnik in 1957, debris has steadily been accumulating around planet Earth.
50 years into the space race, we have littered the heavens with our garbage.
And now, about 20,000 pieces later, Earth orbit has turned into a deadly debris-filled junkyard.
It looks like the Earth surrounded by a hive of bees.
Most of the space debris includes shards of rockets, satellites that no longer function, or pieces of an object that have broken up after a launch. Caught in Earth's gravitational pull, these pieces are traveling upwards of 22,000 miles per hour.
Say more than 10 times faster than a bullet.
A collision between functioning objects such as satellites or inhabited spacecraft and space junk could be catastrophic. The Joint Space Operations Center, or JSPOC, is a top-secret Air Force surveillance unit that makes it their business to track every object that orbits around Earth, including space debris.
We use a number of different sensors around the world, known as the Space Surveillance Network. It's a network of 29 stations all around the globe, radars as well as optical telescopes that track over 18,000 man-made objects in space. And that includes active satellites as well as dead satellites, and then rocket bodies that were associated with those launches, as well as debris, things that have just shed off. If they were to run into each other, it really would be a catastrophic conjunction.
To be tracked by JSPOC, debris must be at least 2 inches wide. There are much smaller objects that cannot be tracked.
On most of my shuttle flights, we always saw small pits in the windows about the size of a pencil point.
The highest population of debris are in low Earth orbit.
And in 2008, an intentional collision between two satellites created an international outrage and a cloud of debris that threatened low Earth orbit like never before. Our edge of space is Earth orbit, a new frontier for space tourism and exploration. But danger lurks here, space debris, and it threatens our spacecraft and satellites like never before. In 2007, the total estimated amount of space debris was 20,000 pieces, 14,000 of which were trackable. Then, in 2008, China's space program intentionally crashed two satellites together as an anti-satellite test. The international space community was outraged.
The 10th of January of 2007, the number of objects we were tracking was less than 14,000. Here we are 16 months later, and we've increased that number by over 30% to over 18,000.
The problem of space debris continues to grow, and collisions have already occurred between space junk and functioning objects.
One of them was a piece of debris that struck a gravitation boom on a spacecraft, severed the boom.
To avoid future collisions, JSPOC is in constant contact with NASA and other international space entities to inform them when a spacecraft or satellite might be threatened, so that the spacecraft could be maneuvered around the space debris. Much like a boat maneuvers around hazards in a waterway.
Beneath the surface of the water here, what you can't see is what's going to actually give you the most damage if we run into a log or a snag beneath the surface. And in orbit, that's the same problem that we face. We don't track all the debris that could actually cripple or kill your spacecraft. And we rely on the fact that you're just statistically unlikely to hit a piece of debris to protect you. And that insurance policy is going to run out someday.
Fortunately, there haven't been any catastrophic collisions between inhabited spacecraft and space debris, yet.
We've never seen a human-piloted spacecraft run into orbital debris and been damaged, but we've had some close calls.
She packed my bags last night, pre-flight. 0 hour, 9 a.m. And I'm gonna be high as a kite by then. I miss the earth so much, I miss my wife. It's lonely out in space on such a timeless flight. And I think it's gonna be a long, long time till touchdown brings me round again to find I'm not the man they think I am at home. Oh no, 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 I'm a rocket man, burning out his fuse out there alone. And I think it's gonna be a long, long time till touchdown brings me round again to find I'm not the man they think I am at home. Oh no, 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 I'm a rocket man, burning out his fuse out there alone. Mars ain't the kind of place to raise your kids. In fact, it's cold as hell. and there's no one there to raise them if you did. And all the science I don't understand, it's just my job 5 days a week. A rocket man, a rocket man. And I think it's gonna be a long, long time till touchdown brings me round again to find I'm not the man that think I am at home. Oh no, 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 I'm a rocket man, burning out his fuse out there alone. And I think it's gonna be a long, long time till touchdown brings me round again to find I'm not the man that think I am at home. Oh no, 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 I'm a rocket man, burning out his fuse out there alone. And I think it's gonna be a long, long time. And I think it's gonna be a long, long time. And I think it's gonna be a long, long time. And I think it's gonna be a long, long time. And I think it's gonna be a long, long time. And I think it's gonna be a long, long time. And I think it's gonna be a long, long time. And I think it's gonna be a long, long time.
Well, boom is also the word of the day in space. 2 satellites, one Russian, one American, crash into each other hundreds of miles above Earth, creating even more space junk in a sky already full of it. From the terrestrial to the celestial, space, the final frontier, the infinite yawning emptiness, turns out it's more crowded than the Washington Beltway, or at least that tiny bit of it around our planet, which is like a spin cycle for no fewer than 6,000 satellites. Well, today 2 of them collided at 18,000 miles per hour. One a Russian spy satellite, the other an American commercial satellite. Don't worry, nothing sinister, just rotten luck. And now clouds of debris and some orbiting blame. From Moscow, here's Rupert Wingfield Hayes.
This is how our story begins. At a military launch site in the Russian Arctic, a Cosmos satellite is launched into space. For the next 16 years, almost nothing is heard of it. Until Tuesday. High above Siberia, it crosses the path of a US satellite. The impact is massive. The debris cloud is hundreds of miles across. In the vast emptiness of space, how could it have happened?
Russia was the first country in the world to send a man-made object into space when it launched Sputnik back in 1957. Since then, more than 6,500 man-made objects have been launched into space, more than half of them from here in Russia. Many have fallen back to Earth and been burned up in the atmosphere, but thousands still remain, up there, whizzing around at phenomenal speeds.
And it's not just old satellites. This is the moment last year when a NASA astronaut dropped a tool bag.
Oh, great.
Off it goes.
We have a lost tool.
One more thing to add to the growing collection.
It's
The amount of debris in space is staggering. Each of these dots represents one object. This is the picture further out. Nearly 13,000 objects, all travelling 10 times faster than a rifle bullet. Experts say it's a recipe for disaster.
At some point it could present danger
not only to low Earth operations, but even to the exploration of deep space, because in order to go to the moon or to Mars or beyond, we still have to go through near Earth orbits.
This week's collision is a stark warning. If we want to continue exploring space, we're going to have to find some way of cleaning up our junk. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News, in Moscow.
So how much of a danger does the floating debris pose? And is space just getting too crowded? Those are just some of the questions I posed this afternoon to Professor Michio Kaku. He's a physicist at the City University of New York. Professor Kaku, thanks for coming on the program again. So it looks as if outer space is more congested than the I-95.
That's right. There's a junkyard of debris in outer space. 17,000 pieces of junk. Everything from screwdrivers to pliers to booster rocket parts. And this was an accident waiting to happen with so much debris out there in this junkyard.
So you're really surprised that it didn't happen any earlier?
It was inevitable. This time a Cosmos 2251 satellite weighing about a ton collided into an Iridium satellite weighing about 1,200 pounds, and they collided at around 18,000 miles per hour, creating a shower of debris. Dozens of parts have now been tracked. Ultimately, perhaps hundreds, maybe thousands of pieces of debris will come out of this accident.
And I was amazed, Professor, to find out that there is actually a whole agency in this country that tracks debris in space.
That's right. Some of our largest military computers are used to track everything from paint flecks all the way out to booster rocket parts. And just remember that if you go down to a fraction of an inch or larger, there are probably several hundred thousands of pieces of debris that are too small to track but pose a threat because they travel at about 18,000 miles per hour.
So do they, for instance, pose a threat to the space shuttle, which is due to launch on the 22nd of February?
Yes, it's a potential danger even to the International Space Station. This accident took place at around 490 miles above the surface of the Earth. The International Space Station orbits at around 250 miles above the surface of the Earth. It's only a matter of time before some of the debris settles down and perhaps collides with a communications satellite or maybe even the space station.
I was amazed by the number of satellites that just this one firm, Iridium, has in orbit. I mean, something like 80 satellites, and apparently they have 6 spare satellites just in case something like this would actually happen.
That's right. Most of our communication satellites are farther out, like 20,000 miles from the Earth. They're in stationary orbits. Iridium is a little bit different. They have low-orbit satellites that go around the planet Earth, making them more susceptible to this kind of accident. And remember that many times we lose track of this debris, and it's only a matter of time before one day a major communication network is damaged because of space debris.
And so just very finally, briefly, what are the things that we would be missing if these satellites disappeared? Just give us a list of 5.
Well, we use weather satellites, telecommunication satellites, the internet, spy satellites. Most of our telecommunication structure and, in fact, the culture of the planet Earth is in outer space. Without outer space, we're going to go back about 100 years in terms of telecommunications.
Well, that's the last thing we need at the moment. Professor Kaku, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
We are at the mercy of good luck, nothing else.
There are thousands of satellites in orbit. Many contain small nuclear reactors. When one of these nuclear-powered satellites falls back to Earth, it is like a silent H-bomb, depositing radioactive dust into the atmosphere. Just 1 pound of plutonium dust deposited into the Earth's atmosphere would kill all living creatures and plant life on the face of the planet. The US government presently has nearly 50 pounds of plutonium orbiting planet Earth in a range of military satellites.
But also we know today that there are 34 nuclear reactor cores orbiting the Earth below, launched there by the United States and the former Soviet Union, all the way back to the early 60s when the space program began. These nuclear reactor cores are powering military satellites orbiting the planet. But several of them have fallen back to Earth, including a terrible accident in 1964 of a U.S. military satellite with 2 pounds of plutonium on board. It was called SNAP 9A. It burned up on re-entry, spreading the plutonium globally to be ingested by the people of the Earth into our lungs and to be passed on through our reproductive organs for generations after generations to come. One of the founders of uranium, Dr. John Goffman at Lawrence Livermore Labs in California, studied that particular accident and believes it's one of the major contributors to the increased cancers around the Earth today. So it's not just some theoretical possibility that there might be an accident on launch that could cause contamination. The sheer processing and fabrication of these space devices is killing people already. But if we learned anything from the Challenger and Columbia shuttle accidents, it's that space technology can and does fail. And as we all witnessed on television, that wide debris field as the Columbia burned up on re-entry, this should be a warning to us that launching nuclear power in space could contaminate massive, massive parts of this country or another country on this Earth.
And you take a look at the plans they have, it's mind-boggling. I mean, they are trying to put in motion plans which, in effect, could allow some command post in Colorado Springs, you know, in Colorado mountains, to instantaneously attack any part of the world without warning from space platforms with either nuclear or other high destructive weapons.
And so what we are now witnessing is that NASA and the Department of Energy and the Pentagon are working together to move nuclear power into space.
The chances of something going wrong just by accident are quite high. I mean, these are complicated computerized systems.
In the environmental impact statement for the Cassini mission carrying 72 pounds of plutonium, NASA admitted that if there was a launch explosion and there was a release of the plutonium, that the winds would carry it for about a 60-mile radius, all the way from the Space Center out to Orlando on the west, north to Daytona Beach, and south to Vero Beach, Florida. A 60-mile contamination belt, if you will. And NASA said that they would have to go in and remove all the people. Then they would have to go in and remove all the buildings. Then they'd have to go in and remove all the animals. Can you imagine how they would do that? Then they would have to remove all the vegetation and ultimately remove the top half-inch of soil, because everything would be radioactively contaminated for thousands of years. They would have essentially created a nuclear wasteland. And so that's why this nuclear systems initiative is so dangerous, because they're now contemplating a dramatic expansion, dramatic escalation of the numbers of launches. It's like playing Russian roulette, putting a bullet in the chamber and pulling the trigger. Eventually, one of them is going to go off.
All right, now here's a headline you just don't see every day. Nuclear blast tonight may be dazzling. Good view likely. Almost 50 years ago, from a small island in the Pacific, the U.S. government conducted a test. It was one of a series to find out what would happen if you explode a hydrogen bomb above the Earth's atmosphere in outer space. It was the height of the Cold War. And in early July 1962, this Thor rocket carried a bomb 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb that hit Hiroshima up into the sky, 250 miles up. Other rockets then followed to monitor what was about to happen. And then there was an enormous white flash. Here's a view from another camera. The sky flashes red and green as particles from the bomb drop back into our atmosphere. Green is what happens when radiation collides with oxygen atoms high up in the ozone layer, and blue is when particles strike nitrogen atoms in the thicker air. So here's another view, this one from the ground. This is not a sunset. This is maybe the greatest man-made light show that we never want to see again.
We will examine the effects on the atmosphere of nuclear detonations at 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers, and 250 kilometers altitude. In another view, a high-velocity shock wave is seen to race outward from the radiation front, which is still at a temperature on the order of 10,000 degrees. The cooling fireball and debris mixture, no longer luminous, continues to rise and expand, reaching a diameter of about 40 kilometers at 1 minute.
Sound the siren and they panic.
Condition red. May God have pity on me.
This is Conelrad. This is not a practice, not a drill.
Take cover! Take cover! Take cover! It's a red alert! Condition red! Turn off the gas! Why? Why? It's condition red. It isn't practice. It's the bomb. The bomb is coming! Oh my God, no! Turn off the gas anyway. I'm going...
What we all must learn to do. You and you and you and you. Duck and cover.
Just when you thought there couldn't be more change going on in the world, it turns out magnetic north is moving. Aviators knew this. It's always moved, but not like this. In fact, it's on the move about 40 miles a year now, along the polar cap toward Russia. It's a natural, unstoppable occurrence, but because of it, some airport runways, calibrated by compass, are now 3 or 4 degrees off. At Tampa International in Florida, they're going to repaint the numbers on the runway and redesignate it because dead center top of the world, magnetic north on the campus, on the compass rather, is on the move in a big way.
They could be bigger and more immediate than the threat of global warming, they say. Earth's magnetic field, which acts as our protective shield in space, has a hole in it. And that could put a lot of our earthly functions at risk. Dr. Michio Kaku, professor and author of the book Physics of the Impossible, is back with us. Professor, how are you? And good morning to you.
Glad to be on the show.
Thanks. Twice in 1 week, man. It's bonus hour. What is this solar shield?
Well, every 11 years, the sun has a temper tantrum. It releases a shock wave, a tsunami of radiation that could wipe out communication, weather satellites, GPS, spy satellites, you name it. It's up there in outer space.
So you're saying that my BlackBerry won't work?
The internet, Fox, television, cable, satellite TV, all of it could get wiped out around 2012. That's when we have the peak of the sunspot cycle. That's when the sun's magnetic field flips. North Pole and South Pole flip, releasing a shock wave of radiation, which will then hit the Earth minutes later, potentially wiping out a good chunk of our satellite communications. We're watching it very carefully now.
Well, this happens how often, you say?
Every 11 years.
Well, why an 11-year cycle?
It takes 11 years for the magnetic field of the sun to build up enough intensity to begin the flip process, because it slowly revolves in a circle. It's like winding up the windings of a clock. If you wind up the mainspring of a clock too much, it boing, comes out of control. Same thing with the sun's magnetic field. It literally flips every 11 years, releasing a shock wave of radiation. And that means we have to start to think about reinforcing our satellites, building redundant systems, because it means that GPS, the power grid, weather satellites, communication satellites, satellite television, all of that could get disrupted, peaking around 2012.
So your point is we can't do anything about it in space, but we can do something back here on Earth.
That's right.
But backup systems, are companies really doing that?
Well, they're going to have to do it because, see, we scientists made a mistake. We thought that the next cycle was going to be quiet. Well, some of our data was off by a factor of 20, and that's why we're issuing this alert now. We made a mistake. The next cycle, peaking around 2012, will be much more serious than we previously thought. Now, in the past, we dodged the bullet because we didn't have that many satellites up there 11, 22 years ago. Back in 1990, we didn't have that many space satellites.
Well, that makes sense to me. But, you know, I'm listening to you talk, I'm thinking, why 2K? I'm thinking it's just a tactic that put a lot of fear in a lot of people. It may have gotten us ready, but there was really no danger in the end.
Well, let's hope that it's a dud. Let's hope that nothing happens. However, what if our communication systems are wiped out? Billions of economic activity could be
do you think anyone's taking this seriously?
I think we're going to have to. The physicists are now sounding the alert. We made the mistake. We made the wrong projection. The next solar cycle will be more intense than previously thought, and an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Now's the time to begin to create redundant systems, reinforce our satellites, build backup systems.
All right. Michio Kaku, the word is out. You know, if you render my BlackBerry useless, that's okay. I'm here loud. Do that for a while, then we'll bring it back. Thank you, Doctor. Nice to know. Meg?
Love him.
Were you
He's
listening?
great. Yes.
You were?
Yeah.
What
The
did he say?
physicists messed it up, and
What did
now
he
they
say?
have to fix it. And he talked about the Department of Redundancy Department.
Right. It's on magnetic fields, polar opposites,
we gotta fix it
sun,
down
Earth,
here.
right?
When's it going to happen?
11 years apart. 2012 is the next one.
Okay.
So the last one was minor. So the scientists are to blame for that because they underestimated the power. And they think this time it could be the big one.
giant breach in Earth's magnetic field, presented by Science at NASA. December 16, 2008. NASA's 5 Themis spacecraft have discovered a breach in Earth's magnetic field 10 times larger than anything previously thought to exist. Solar wind can flow in through the opening to load up the magnetosphere for powerful geomagnetic storms. But the breach itself is not the biggest surprise. Researchers are even more amazed at the strange and unexpected way it forms, overturning long-held ideas of space physics. At first, I couldn't believe it, says Themis project scientist David Sybeck of the Goddard Space Flight Center. This finding fundamentally alters our understanding of the solar wind magnetosphere interaction. The magnetosphere is a bubble of magnetism that surrounds Earth and protects us from solar wind. Exploring the bubble is a key goal of the Themis mission, launched in February 2007. The big discovery came on June 3rd of the same year when the 5 probes serendipitously flew through the breach just as it was opening. Onboard sensors recorded a torrent of solar wind particles streaming into the magnetosphere, signaling an event of unexpected size and importance. The opening was huge, 4 times wider than Earth itself, says Wen-Hu Lee, a space physicist at the University of New Hampshire, who has been analyzing the data. Lee's colleague Jimmy Rader, also of New Hampshire, says 10 to the 27 particles per second were flowing into the magnetosphere. That's a 10 followed by 27 zeros. This kind of influx is an order of magnitude greater than what we thought was possible.
Good evening. A Seattle nuclear watchdog group is accusing the federal government of failing to keep the public informed of radiation from the Fukushima nuclear disaster.
As environmental specialist Gary Chittum reports, the government has come out swinging on this one. The story is new at 6:30.
In the days following the earthquake and tsunami in Japan, the U.S. began monitoring radiation from the leaking nuclear power plants. Most of the public attention went to the air monitoring, which showed little or no radiation coming our way. But things were different on the rainwater side.
The level that was detected on March 24th was 41 times the drinking water standard in Olympia.
Jerry Paulette of the watchdog group Heart of America Northwest is reviewing radioactive iodine-131 numbers released by the Environmental Protection Agency last spring.
Our government said no health level standards are being exceeded, when in fact the rainwater in the Northwest was reaching levels 130 times the drinking water standard.
Elevated rainwater samples were collected in Portland, Olympia, and Boise, which had the highest.
Got some lemon cucumbers, snap peas, basil. Gotta have fresh vegetables out of the garden.
The same water fell on Kate Costanet's garden and was collected in her rain barrel. She did not know about the elevated levels.
Certainly not use this for the vegetable garden. In fact, I probably wouldn't have even planted a vegetable garden if I'd known that.
But EPA officials say the data was there for anyone to read on their website, and a spokesman sent us this statement. Since iodine-131 has a very short half-life of approximately 8 days, the levels seen in rainwater were expected to be relatively short in duration. State health agencies added they constantly monitored public drinking water sources and never found levels even approaching the unhealthy range. And even the watchdog group admits watering plants with water exposed only briefly to those levels is unlikely to cause health problems. But they say that's information the public deserves to know. In Seattle, Gary Chittum, King 5 News.
The EPA points out this was a brief period of elevated radiation in rainwater and says its safe drinking water standards are based on chronic exposure to radiation over a lifetime.
Japan's nuclear meltdown linked to baby deaths along the West Coast. Eugene, Oregon. 8 cities in the Pacific Northwest are experiencing a dramatic increase in baby deaths since the Japanese nuclear disaster. Despite media reports that the fallout is negligible in the U.S. mainland, states the Eugene Weekly in a June 16th report that tied to statistics based from federal agencies and the National Center for Health Statistics. There's been an increase in about 35% in deaths of babies under 1 year old in Boise, Seattle, Portland, and the northern California cities of Santa Cruz, Sacramento, San Francisco, San Jose, and Berkeley.
Human being is the whole.
He is the society. He is the separate human individual. He is the factor which brings about this chaos.
Yes, I'm following that very closely.
He is the world and the world is him.
Yes. Therefore, if he changes,
The whole thing
everything changes. If he doesn't change, nothing changes.
You are humanity. So for humanity to take responsibility, you need to take primarily responsibility for your state of consciousness, because only a diseased or dysfunctional state of consciousness produces a diseased and dysfunctional world out there. By world, I mean the human-made world that has been imposed on what's already there, the planet, which is potentially, of course, a paradise. The planet, pristine, unbelievable jewel, a being of great intelligence. We are not separate from it, but the being is going through a transitional process, and every transitional process is critical. It may or may not work, in which case the being will go some other way. Your state of consciousness determines what kind of world you create, what kind of action you take, and what consequences your actions have. As I see it, and I don't think anybody who reads history can doubt it, there is a deep-seated dysfunction in humans, has been there for thousands of years. And if there's no shift in that, then the dysfunction will destroy us. It probably won't destroy the planet because the planet has enormous resources, but it will take a while. It would take a while for the planet to recover. All you have to do then is primarily take responsibility for your state of consciousness now. Now.
Why don't you ask yourself that question? Why am I, a human being, who have been through all this? Why haven't I changed? What would be your answer? Either you are not serious, you want to live a very, very superficial life, and that superficiality temporarily satisfies you, or you really don't care. As long as you have immediate pleasures, immediate satisfactions, you really don't care. You don't care for your children if they are murdered. If you really have no deep love, affection for them, if you had, you would prevent all wars. So apparently, none of these things mean anything to you. Or probably you are so deeply conditioned psychologically. Of course, we are biologically conditioned, that's a different matter altogether. But psychologically conditioned, and one is not aware of it. And you can, unless that there is freedom from that conditioning, you will go on this way.
So, to take responsibility, there needs to be just, of course, an awakening where you can say, okay, I will take responsibility now. Some people don't know that there is even the possibility of taking responsibility. That's why you are so important. Once you've seen that, that's your responsibility. Now you know it. People who are not yet at that level don't realize it, and that's fine. You can't expect the whole world already to be at that stage. It's enough for you to take responsibility, knowing there's still a few million others who don't know that they can take responsibility because they live in such unconsciousness that they see the entire evil in others. What they see as evil, it's all in them. And they make half the world into their enemy. It's all out there. They're still, that's fine. Your responsibility. It's only those are required to take responsibility, you who are up to it. But even those who are totally unconscious still, on the one hand, they don't know what they're doing. Obviously, as Jesus said on the cross, they know not what they do. In other words, they are in the grip of unconscious forces or unconscious mental emotional streams. They don't know what they do. They cannot be held responsible, and people say, well, they should be held responsible. No, they can't, they don't know what they do. However, the fact that they are not responsible because they can't be responsible does not mean that they do not suffer the consequences of their unconsciousness. So they generate suffering. And eventually, suffering is the fire in which the ego gets burned up. The collective ego and the personal ego. That's the long way, the slow way, the painful way. And then there is a shortcut, which is any spiritual teaching it cuts through that. The painful way, the long way of waking up, more and more suffering. The planet might not endure that such a long learning process for humanity. So if the learning process of humanity does not become shortened, it is doubtful that the planet can allow humanity to learn through further suffering for another 500 years, or even 200 years, or even 100 years. So you're responsible for all that.
If I radically change, surely it affects the rest of the consciousness of man. Now, why don't you change?
You are the beginning of the transformed world.
Ground control to Major Tom. Ground control to Major Tom. Take your protein pills and put your helmet on. Ground control to Major Tom. 8, 7, 6. Commencing countdown, engines on. 3, 2. Check ignition and may God's love be with you. This is ground control to Major Tom. You've really made the grade, and the papers want to know whose shirt you wear. Now it's time to leave the capsule if you dare. This is Major Tom to ground control. I'm stepping through the door, and I'm floating in a most peculiar way, and the stars look very different today, for here am I sitting in a tin can.
Radio would like to thank all the news sources: Eckhart Tolle, Krishnamurti, David Bowie, Kate Bush, Elton John, Chief Seattle.
Yonder sky that has wept tears of compassion upon my people for centuries untold, and which to us appears changeless and eternal, may change. Today is fair. Tomorrow it may be overcast with clouds. There was a time when our people covered the land as the waves of a wind-ruffled sea cover its shell-paved floor. But that time long since passed away with the greatness of tribes that are now but a mournful memory. I will not dwell on, nor mourn over our untimely decay, nor reproach my pale-faced brothers with hastening it, as we too may have been somewhat to blame. We are two distinct races with separate origins and separate destinies. There is little in common between us. Your religion was written upon tablets of stone by the iron finger of your God, so that you could not forget. The red man could never comprehend or remember it. Our religion is the traditions of our ancestors. The dreams of our old men, given them in solemn hours of the night by the Great Spirit, and the visions of our sachems, and is written in the hearts of our people. To us, the ashes of our ancestors are sacred, and their resting place is hallowed ground. You wander far from the graves of your ancestors, and seemingly without regret. Your dead cease to love you and the land of their nativity as soon as they pass the portals of the tomb and wander away beyond the stars. They are soon forgotten and never return. Our dead never forget this beautiful world that gave them being. They still love its verdant valleys, its murmuring rivers, its magnificent mountains, sequestered vales, and verdant-lined lakes and bays, and ever yearn in tender, fond affection over the lonely-hearted living, and often return from the happy hunting ground to visit, guide, console, and comfort them.
You are listening to Small World Radio.